So much of what we might want to do with files and directories is renaming, copying, moving and deleting them. Occasionally, we might also want to make a global search and replacement on the contents of an existing file. I'll devote the next couple of videos to these kinds of tasks and how to use Java's support for this kind of work. I've created a new project called Managing Files and have the main class's main method ready to go. I've also copied over my students.json file from the previous challenge video and I've put that in this project's root folder. You can find this file in the resources section of this video. It contains information about 1,000 students and their course engagement records mocked up with random data and formatted using JSON. The Files class has a wealth of helpful methods I haven't yet covered, and I'll be using this file to demonstrate some of these methods. I'll rename, move, copy and delete files using methods on this class. Under the covers, these methods delegate to the OS file system provider for increased efficiency. I'll start by showing you how to rename a file using the IOA with 2 file instances. I'll create a file instance to the existing students.json file. Next, I'll create a file instance using the new name of the file, in this case student-activity.json. Notice that this is perfectly valid to do. You can create a file instance using a file name even though this file doesn't exist. I'll confirm that the old file, the file I plan to rename, actually exists. I can execute a rename to method on the old file, passing it the new file instances. If this is successful, I'll print that out. If the file doesn't exist, I'll print that out too. If I run this code as is, it runs without any issues and my students.json file is successfully renamed to students-activity.json. There's a couple of problems with this code though. IntelliJ is showing me one issue by highlighting a warning that I'm not using the output from the rename to method. There are a lot of things that could go wrong or trying to perform the rename operation. Ignoring the result is a bad idea because it's possible the rename operation actually failed. This could be due to user permissions or a variety of other reasons like network connectivity and so on. Remember, one of the problems with the Java IO classes is they don't throw an IO exception. Instead, they simply return a boolean and you don't have a good window into what went wrong if you did get a false back from this method. I'm going to leave this code as it is though, because instead I want to use path and the files class. First, I'll execute the toPath method on file that lets me take an existing file instance and turn it into an NIO toPath instance. The path interface has a similar method called toFile, so you can work with both IO and NIO, 2 classes, by converting between them this way. I'll create a new variable, oldPath, setting it to oldFile.toPath. And I'll do the same with new path from the new file. I'll start with a try block because by now you'll know most methods on files throw an IO exception. This is considered an improvement because it results in targeted and informative exceptions about any problems that occurred during the operation. I'll start out typing files, .r, and wait for IntelliJ to list the method names. What I want you to see here is that there isn't a rename method on files. Instead, I need to use the move method, so I'll back out that R and finish with a move method call, passing it first new path in this case. Our file was renamed in the last bit of code, so I want to now rename students-activity.json back to students.json, so I pass the new path first and the old path next. After this statement, if I get to this point, I can print that the rename was successful. I'll again catch the IO exception that's thrown and print out any stack trace from the error. Running this code, I get the console output for the first rename that the file doesn't exist. That's because I already renamed it in the previous run. In the case of the path move operation, I get the path renamed successfully. I can see that if I examine the project pane, that the students.json file is listed there, so it was renamed back to the original name. Let's explore this a bit further and change the path we're moving to, adding a subfolder as part of that path. I'm going to first comment out the file's code because I think it'll make the following code less confusing. Now, my code doesn't compile since my paths are derived from the file instances, but that's okay. I'll remove those two local variable statements and start over. I'll make old path the students.json file this time. For the new path, I want to include a subfolder, so files, then a slash or file separator, and that goes before the new file name studentactivity.json. I also want to reverse the arguments in the files.move method, since now old path is students.json. If I run this code, I get a no such file exception, and the message shows the from file, then an arrow token, and the file name. It's important to understand that this move method isn't going to create subdirectories. Since the files directory doesn't yet exist, I'll get this error. I can fix this by first using create directories before I call the move method. I don't want to call this method with the entire path name though. I need to strip off the last part of the path, or the file name here. To do this, I can use the subpath method to just get the directory's path. I'll start at index 0 and include everything except the last part of the name, so name count -1. I'll change the message I output to the console to be more informative, so old path moved and renamed to new path. I'll rerun this again. My console output tells me that students.json was moved and renamed to the files subfolder and the file name student-activity.json. I should see the files subfolder in my project panel. If you don't see it, just reload from disk and it should show up. Opening that folder, I can see the students-activity.json file there. In this example, I was able to use this one method to both rename a file and move it to another directory. I can also use the move method to rename directories, which I'll do next. I'll comment this last bit of code out. I'll create a path to my files folder, and I can do that using a relative path, so just files. I don't want to include a preceding file separator symbol. In other words, this is what makes it relative. I'll do the same for the folder I want it to be renamed to, so resources here. I'll start with a try block. I'll call files.move with the existing directory, so file dir, and then the directory I want it to be called, so I'll pass it the resource dir path. If no exception is thrown, then I know this was successful, so I'll print directory renamed. Otherwise, I'll print information about the exception. Running this code, I get the message that directory was renamed. Looking at my project panel, I see that I no longer have a files folder, but I do have a resources folder, and that contains my JSON file. I'll manually refactor. Then rename the resources folder in IntelliJ back to files, so my code will run as before. While I'm in here, I'll also add a nested folder in the files folder, and I'll call that the data folder. Getting back to my code, instead of the move method, I want to now use the copy method. I'll also change my message from directory renamed to directory copied to, and I'll print the path that I copied it to. I'll run this real quick. I get the message that the directory was copied to resources, so I'll explore the results in the project panel. I can see the resources folder, but there's nothing in it. The copy method performs a shallow copy of your folder, and in this case, that shallow copy didn't even include my student file. I'll delete the resources folder manually using IntelliJ's delete menu option. If you want to do a deep copy, you'd have to write a little bit of recursive code to handle it. You'll see a lot of examples online using the walk file tree method, but let's see if we can do something similar with less code and using streams. Since this video is getting a bit long, I'll pause here a moment and demonstrate a way to recursively copy your directory's content in the next video.